My name's Paul Wedgwood. I'm the owner of Splash Damage and the lead game designer on Enemy-Territory-Quake-Wars. And my company works with Kevin Cloud out of id Software, who's the executive producer on the title. Enemy-Territory-Quake-Wars is a brand new title from id Software being developed by my company Splash Damage over in London. It's an online multiplayer combat game with vehicles and bots, and takes place in the Strog universe. So as a kind of prequel to the Quake series of single-player games, it tells the story of the Strog invasion of Earth in 2065. It has a really strong focus on team play, and as a spiritual successor to Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, you take on a combat role such as assault or infiltration, and then play alongside your team online to pursue specific military objectives and capture territory from the enemy. So there's a very focused front line that exists on the map with no dispersion of combat. You know exactly where the battle's taking place. And it's based on some fairly new technology developed by John Carmack over at id Software and then continued to be developed by Splash Damage called the Mega Texture. And this allows us to render out the terrain right to the horizon and have a unique texture that represents the entire landscape, which has several really significant benefits for gameplay. So the game is based in 2065, which is the Strog invasion of Earth. And this is the precursor to the Quake series of games, so you could think of it kind of as Quake Zero. What we do with each of the maps, and there are 12 of them in the game, is that each is a beat in the story of the invasion of Earth. So in Quake 2 at the very start, if you've played the game, you have the humans retaliating against Strogos by going through the slip gates. So there's a map in Enemy Territory Quake Wars about the humans, the Global Defense Force's capture of Strog slipgate technology, and in this map the Strog are attacking and they're trying to destroy this technology to get it out of the GDF's hands. So in kind of the same way that, you know, World War II movies will retell the story of a famous battle of World War II, this is a multiplayer combat game but with a story arc that retells the invasion of Earth. Well, we have 12 maps in production which form 4 campaigns of 3 maps each, and these take place in North America, Northern Europe, North Africa and the Pacific. So each of the maps in the game is unique and distinct in terms of its geographical location, the plot that's driving the maps, whether it has precipitation, it might have a reservoir, a river, coastline, it could be an Arctic mountain range or kind of smooth hills in the middle of the desert. For the bot support that's just been announced, the goal is to ensure that a bot plays exactly like a real player, that you can't really tell the difference between the two. And so they will do everything from team kill you during warm-up to taunt you when they're kicking your ass, but mainly they will use every weapon, tool, item, their individual abilities, when they earn rewards, the vehicles that they use. The goal is that they can do everything that a player can do. You have control in the interface over their AI skill and their combat skill, and you can also choose whether you want them to complete objectives or not. So if you want to jump into the game on your own and just practice completing all of the objectives and doing objective runs, then you can have the bots just do all of the support and combat stuff. If you want them to be completing objectives and watch the map progress and just flying around in an Nancy taking pot shots at them or standing up on a hill practicing sniping, you can do the same. You can play with bots on your own, just on your own computer, or on a LAN you can play with a couple of friends, perhaps just 2 of you with a team of 11 bots supporting you fight against each other, or you can play on the internet with bots. We've been developing Enemy Territory Quake Wars over at Splash Damage for id Software for a couple of years now, and that's always been our primary focus. But recently id Software announced the fact that it's now being ported to the 360 and the PS3 as well. So this is a completely new game for both of those platforms. So over at Splash Damage, we do our best to provide support. You know, when someone wants to understand how a certain aspect of the engine works or what our intention was with a design element that we've worked on with id Software. But the 2 separate development projects for the 360 and the PS3 that are being developed by Nerve Software and Z-Access are being directed out of id Software by Kevin Cloud, who's also the executive producer on the PC platform, the game that we're working on. But they are exactly the same game, using the same engine with the same gameplay goals and the same really strong focus on team play, with subtle differences really just in the kind of engine and inner workings so that they can take advantage of platform specific hardware. I think that id Software spent a lot of time thinking about what the features of the 360 would be, whether anything needed to be added or removed. But the changes will really be quite subtle. Obviously, there's a greater focus on the use of an analog controller on the 360, whereas traditionally PC players will play on a keyboard and a mouse. But beyond that, obviously, there are two distinct and separate communities. And id Software felt that, generally speaking, console players would rather play with their group, all using the same controller and having the same level playing field. And then PC users would play on keyboards and mouse, or analog controller if they choose to, but again with other PC players on a level playing field. So the two sides won't be able to play with each other online, but they will be playing the same game. The release dates are staggered slightly. The release date hasn't been set. As an id Software game, it's going to be done when it's done. The focus is always on getting the game's scope to the point where the quality is correct and all of the components are present, rather than having an arbitrary deadline, and that's the point when you consider the level to be done. That's always the way that id Software has worked, and it's certainly the way that we prefer to work at Splash Damage as well. This is true also of the 360 and the PS3, so they won't have specific release dates either. Firstly, I guess when we talk about beta, that's the kind of major milestone of the project internally. So, you know, a developer can have a beta out with the public, you know, at the point that they're actually alpha internally, or they're approaching beta, or they're past beta. But in terms of the project's actual status, we're approaching beta, the big beta milestone internally. So that means that all of the art is final, all of the gameplay will be final, and we're really just focused on performance optimizations and finding those niggling bugs that would, you know, otherwise kind of disrupt the player's experience of the game. But while we're doing this, one of the big focuses is balance. Because we have so many different elements for the team, so much asymmetry that exists between the two teams, it's really important to us to see how it plays in the real world, just like watching a sport and seeing how a different formation affects the strategy in a football game. And we're not objective enough, because we see the game every day and play the same things regularly and have our own preferences, to see how that performance takes place. So we have 4 different ways of dealing with this. Firstly, for accessibility, we have focus tests, and we bring people in that are completely new to multiplayer shooters, perhaps they haven't even played on a PC before, and we see how they react to the user interface, and we do our best to improve the user interface to make it more accessible to the new player coming in. This is important to us because we've always maintained this philosophy of never nerfing gameplay, its depth or complexity, just to suit new players, because we want the game to have really good longevity. We want people to play it for weeks and months and years, not just like 10, 12 hours and then put it down and play something else. The second thing is a group of production testers that we have at Splash Damage, and these are really hardcore players. They're ex-pro team members that might have played in a Intel-sponsored Return to Castle Wolfenstein team, or in one of the top Tribes 2 teams, or one of the top Battlefield teams, and they give us really specific feedback on things like cover, concealment, fortification, how many rounds they think should be in a clip, how much health a health pack should give, and it gives us this kind of objectivity for how games are going to work out when players have been playing it for 3 months, or 6 months, or 9 months. Then we have a QA team over at Activision who round the clock is stomping on the game just to try and break it, just to try and find bugs, try and discover which hardware paths still need optimizing. So if there's a video card that we need to go in and optimize and take advantage of specific features, they'll track that stuff down for us. And then for the kind of public at large, we have a closed beta. Now, at the moment, the closed beta is invitation only. So it's been, up until right now, friends and family of Splash Damage, id Software, Activision, coming in usually with higher spec machines and giving us general feedback on the game, how it plays, what they like, what they dislike. We've just opened that up to accept applications from clans. We put up a news post and had 1,000 apply in the first 24 hours, so we've taken that news post down again. And we're looking for clans to come in and start playing each other and giving us feedback on how the balance works out with really experienced players playing each other. So then we've got a sense of like 2 organised teams a year from now. How's it going to feel? How would it play? That closed beta is going through different phases where the number of people involved is increased, and we have the potential, you know, through partnerships and things with different sites, to have registration betas that go into the tens of thousands of people if we want to. But it gives us some control over the specification of hardware that people are using and stuff. And by having a registration process and a closed beta, we find that people are more involved in giving us feedback on our private forums and submitting bugs and sending crash reports and that kind of thing. Something that's been really important to us from the start is that a player can jump into the game and pick something that suits their preferred playing style. So as a player, you might prefer to be right in the thick of the action at the front line, you know, with a rocket launcher or a huge general purpose machine gun, or driving a tank and just blowing stuff up and shooting things and having fun as a kind of sandbox, you know, getting out an Anansi hovercopter and flying across and running ram raids, you know, around the objective area. Or you might prefer infiltration, so you would pick perhaps the covert ops character class. He can deploy radar on the battlefield to gather intelligence for his teammates, which is relayed via a command map to everybody, and then sneak into the enemy base, steal a disguise, run around disguised as a member of the Strogg, plant a third eye camera in their spawn so you know when they're spawning in, and hack into their defense deployables and disable them. You could play as medic, where your job is to support your teammates by giving them health packs, reviving them when they're incapacitated, and calling for supply drops. So a big Jotun cargo plane flies over and drops off this crate and everyone can run to it and get additional supplies and carry on fighting. So it's interesting because you can play the assault combat role and be a kind of twitch shooter guy, you know, with a really good aim and really enjoy getting into one-on-one combat with people, or you can play as a support role and never fire a single shot and technically still come at the top of the scoreboard because you're rewarded with experience points for your team play actions. There's a sweet spot for combat in Quake Wars of 24 players. Now this is because traditionally in multiplayer combat games you've either run around deathmatching or capturing flags, and in more recent multiplayer shooters dispersed across a map using the kind of capture and hold game type. And what this tends to mean is that even if there's 64 players on a server, if there are 10 flags on the map, then that's only 6.4 players, or 3 versus 3 combat that can go on at any point at any one of those flags, you know, kind of treating it as averages. In enemy territory Quake Wars, because you have this natural front line that exists at the area of contention between the two territories where the objective is being pursued, you have 24 people going at it pretty much all the time. And that creates a level of intensity that's far greater despite there only being 24 people on the server. Any more than that, and it can become a bit of a street fight. Back in the Return to Castle Wolfenstein multiplayer days, we developed a map over at Splash Damage called Market Garden, and people regularly hosted 50-player games where everybody was just running down the street and just running and shooting and dying. And it can be really good fun, but it's not a focused team play experience. And so for that experience, 24 players works out really well. For clans and in tournament play, I think that 5 or 6 players would work out fine for the more experienced players who, you know, who have a set of plays worked out in advance before they join a server. We have a good server administration system in the game. First, we have a separate server launcher, which allows you to just set all of the settings that you want for the server. It doesn't require graphics or anything like that, so you can do it via remote desktop on Windows or to a Linux box, and you can just launch a server with everything that you want set up. Once the server's launched, in-game from the Limbo menu, you have an administration interface that lets you set whether you want to allow voting, which campaigns are going to play, whether you want to change the map, if you want to shuffle teams, you know, that kind of stuff. And then for the player, if voting is enabled on the server, they have a whole bunch of votes that they can call as well. So if teams are particularly unbalanced, they can call for the teams to be shuffled based on who's got the most experience points to balance out the really good players. They can vote for a surrender because they're fed up and they've been playing this objective for ages and they're not getting anywhere at all. So we've really tried to take care of the administration of servers and improving the experience that people get when they're playing online, you know, on those 3 levels: the voting system, the in-game server administration system, and then the server launch tool. The good thing about the in-game systems is that they're platform independent, so it doesn't matter what platform you're playing on, and it doesn't matter what platform the server's running on. It's a standardized interface for interacting with the server. As an id Software game, Enemy Territory Quake Wars doesn't have a fixed release date. It's going to be done when it's done. But it's our hope to get it out in 2007, and it's definitely this 2007, so you're not going to have to wait for the second coming.